Hi, so this is intro to opening and loading projects into Zbrush for people like me who don't really use Zbrush. Zbrush has some kind of weird idiosyncrasies that make it a little bit different from other 3D applications, so we'll go through some of these. First thing, when you open Zbrush, you'll be greeted with this. This is the lightbox, and it holds all kinds of templates for different things you can make. There's low poly heads, there's higher poly heads, there's spheres you can start to sculpt with, there's animals, there's bits of jewelry, there's shapes, there's all kinds of stuff. And what you can do is, I have a template canvas, a couple of template canvases that I've put in here. And how you can do that is if you've got a file that you want to use, so let's double click on this and bring it in. I'll run through what the file is like first. So first of all, I mean, this is a video this is a video about sculpting coins, so everything's circular. So we got a circular canvas, same as you would have. I'm a traditional hand modeler who's moved over to digital, so I would have started with a disc of perspex and some clay. So what I've got is a disc here that I'm going to start modeling on, but what's slightly different about this, if we come over here, this is a subtool menu. We'll come to that in a bit. These are all, if you think of it a little bit like Photoshop layers, these are all the different elements of your model that you can put in separately. What I've got here is some blocks that give me a guide to how high my modeling is in different planes. These days I tend not to use them because I've just been using ZBrush so long, I've just got a feel for where I want things to go. But the thing about ZBrush is it doesn't have a set measurement scale, so it's not like something like ArtCam where you're working in 0.03, 0.02, you're actually putting physical measurements in. ZBrush works by eye, so it's a lot closer to physical sculpting than it is to CAD in some senses. If you're modeling, I used to have, when I modeled in plaster or clay, I'd have these little kind of brass things with like a gap at different heights, so I could put them over the model and make sure I wasn't sculpting too high. Of course, you haven't got that in ZBrush, so what I've made is these little blocks, and what we can do is use a thing called live boolean so they kind of disappear, but what will happen is if you sculpt over if you sculpt over 0.3, the modeling will start to vanish, because this is effectively giving you a kind of ceiling, a clipping ceiling. You can see it more obviously with the floor, so if I turn the floor on, you'll notice that it kind of cuts away the rest of that block that I made. So it's trimmed it down to just give me this is basically my table, my zero level plane, and these blocks are doing the same kind of thing. And you do that with live boolean, but we'll talk about that in a bit. So you can take a template like this, and I'll put a link to the file in the comments so you can download it if you want. You can either save it on your hard drive and load it up each time you want to by going up to File, Open, and you'll always be asked this even if you've just saved it, and you can go and find your canvas in here and load it up as you would do with anything else. Takes a couple of seconds. There we go. But what you can do, what's kind of handier in some ways, is you can put these things into Lightbox. So if you're on Windows, you need to get yourself to, let me just bring that down. So see Program Files, Pixel Logic, ZBrush, whatever version of ZBrush you've got, Z Projects, and these are all the files that you can see in the ZBrush Lightbox. And here's my modeling canvases and ZB model canvases by them. So you can just take your file and drag it into there, and the next time you start ZBrush, you will get that in your kind of canvas straight away. And the reason that's quite useful is because, I'm just going to close this down a second and reopen it from scratch. It is coming. There we go. Right. So if I hide that. So if I come with a completely blank canvas, and this is one of the weird things about ZBrush, and this, when I first started using it, which was on a live project, which probably wasn't a great idea, it was one of the things that stumped me the most because I couldn't get past this bit. It was really hard to figure out how ZBrush was actually, what it was actually doing, because of course I had no files to open because I hadn't made anything. So I thought, well, I'll start off with let's start with a cylinder, and I'm going to make a cylinder. There we go. Right, I'm kind of, I know how that works, and I'm going to move it around and I'm going to start sculpting on it. But as soon as I tried to do anything, what I get was repeats of the same thing, and it was really annoying, and I couldn't figure out how to get it to stop doing that. And what you had to do is, once you've pulled out a shape, is you have to go up here and you have to hit edit before you can actually do any sculpting. And it took me a little while to figure that out. It's a simple thing. I mean, people who know how to use ZBrush will probably laugh at me for pointing this out. But when you come from another package where you kind of drop, Blender, Shift A, drop a cube in, and then you can just start moving it around and doing stuff. Come into something like this where, I've dropped a shape in, now start moving it around, and it doesn't do that. It does something totally different. It throws you a bit, and it's one of those things that you actually have to kind of sit down and figure out, what do I do? How do I get past this tiny little step that is so simple in everything else? So once you've hit this edit, once you've got an object in space and you've hit this edit button, you can then click in the canvas and you can start to move it around. Over here, you've got buttons that handle the general movement of your objects in the canvas. So move is move, rotate is rotate, zoom 3D, zooms in and out on the canvas. It doesn't change the size of the objects, it just moves in. And frame brings everything into, sizes it to the canvas you're on. These little buttons here give you your kind of axes for rotational movement. So X, Y, Z, I can move it pretty freely. But because I want to, do you know what I'm going to do? Is I'm going to load up the canvas. Let's get rid of that thing and we'll get the canvas up. And we can see a bit better what we're trying to do. Okay, so there's the canvas, right. So I'm going to zoom out. If I click on the canvas and drag, and then I hold shift, it'll snap to particular planes. You can also use this little fella here to sort of move things in particular increments, which is a little bit easier. With the XYZ button pressed, I can move things pretty freely. But if I click the rotate on Z axis, it will, you can kind of see it there, it's actually rotating the canvas around, which is more useful for us coin sculptors. Do you know what I'm going to do? Is I'm going to load in a project and we'll have a look at something. Let's have a look. Let's do that one. Yeah, let's bring this in, just so we can see what it's actually doing. Boink, there we go. Right, so you can see now when I'm clicking and dragging, although I can still move backwards and forwards, the movement is much more weighted towards a movement around the Z axis, which if I put the floor button on, there's the blue line here. You can see that gives you your, so red is X, green is Y, blue is Z. Okay. So if you have a file ready made, you can go to File, Open, bring it in. If you've got, if you want to start from scratch, you can go into the Lightbox. I will put a link to my template, which you can use if you want to, or you can change it or do whatever you like with it afterwards. The other side of things is subtools. I mentioned that earlier. So your subtools is your list of, you might make a model up out of lots of different pieces and stitch them together. So each one of these would be called a subtool. And you can load these in by either coming up to this little thumbnail here, clicking on it, and you can import something over the top which will replace what's there. You can also export an individual subtool, as something I keep meaning to change on the ZBrush UI is that it times out when you swing off the menus, and it's a bit finicky. You can export a subtool as, you know, most kind of standard formats, STL and OBJ is pretty much the standard ones for Coin CNC, and it will only, no matter how many layers you've got, it will only export the one you're actually you've got selected at a time. Down here you can duplicate a subtool if you want to, and you can, here's a button called append. If you click that, it'll give you the option to add something else into the file. So I can now click on that. If I want to move it and change the size of it, you would think that would be over here, but it's not. It's over here. So if we click the scale button, it gives you a standard gizmo. Little yellow square in the middle is the overall scale. The box is scale along an axis. The arrow is move along an axis, and these little corner things are general move around. A lot of ZBrush tools operate based on the camera position. So whereas this is moving in a plane now, if I kind of go at a 3/4 angle, you see it's moving in. It's not just moving in one plane. It's moving according to where I'm sort of looking, which takes a bit of figuring out sometimes. Here you've got a little padlock icon. So any scaling is always from the center of the gizmo, like that. If you unlock this padlock, you can move the gizmo. And then if you click the padlock again, any scaling is then done from the origin of the gizmo. Where that is really handy is if you've got a background image and you want to put some 3D object on top of it, and you want to sort of line it up. So what I tend to do with that is I will get the gizmo and one part of the model lined up. So I might say, well, I'm going to stick that there, but I want this to come all the way down here, but I want it to grow from one particular point. And then I can do that, and then I can grow it into the design. I'll go through that in a bit more detail than something else. So you can reset it. You can kind of, because if you've got this padlock undone, you can alter the orientation of the gizmo, so you can move your object along, you know, whatever kind of axis you want to, depending on what you're modeling. This is probably more relevant for full 3D modelers. For us, you kind of just want it as it is. So unlock, reset it, brings it back to sort of orthogonal, you know, up, down, left, right viewpoint, and then home brings it back to the center of the overall model. Okay, and I could export that egg as whatever I wanted, or I could import something else in on the top if I so wish. Underneath that, delete. It'll always ask you if you want to delete it. Yeah, thanks, I'll delete that. Duplicate does what it says on the tin. Rename renames it. Let's add a couple of things in. So it's a little bit like Photoshop. So we've got 3 layers now. If I want this one to go to the top, I use this little arrow here to move it up. If you've got lots and lots of subtools, you can use this little slider to change the number that are visible at any one time. There are also, because ZBrush is weird, so these are kind of like layers, or that's how I always see them, probably because we tend to, because we're coin people and we tend to think of things in one plane. I always think of these as layers of modeling, but ZBrush does actually have layers of its own layers of sculpting, but they behave in a slightly different way. They, if you turn on a new sculpting layer, I don't want to do it because I find it really temperamental and not very useful. It should be useful because what you can do is I could add a layer onto this model and then sculpt detail on it, and it wouldn't look like it's sitting on a new layer. It would be part of the model, but I can then change the scale height of that discreetly against the background of the model. But for some reason I can never ever get it to work properly. It always seems to end up crashing my model when I export it. So want to keep these quite short so they don't end up rambling, because there's so many different rabbit holes to go down. So when you open ZBrush, you're greeted with the lightbox. You can put your own model into the lightbox by going to, if you're on Mac, you go to Users Public ZBrush Data and into the Z Projects folder and stick your file in there. If you are on Windows, you put it into Program Files, Pixelogic, ZBrush, Z Projects, and it will then appear in the lightbox, and you can just double click it. Failing that, you can go to File, Open, and just navigate to wherever your file is. If you want to start from scratch, completely from scratch, then, which I wouldn't advise doing because I've got a template for you, then starting completely from scratch, you click and drag your object. That is not doing what I wanted it to do. Do you know what? I'm going to say don't start from scratch, use my template there, just to make that easier, because it's a nightmare. Okay.